That was
And
there
do you want me
we go.
to do the intros, or will you do the intros?
Yeah, Keelan, you're the moderator. If you want to start that, go for it. I think we're ready.
Okay. Everybody, my name's Kaylon McCabe. I'm going to be the moderator for the session. What does assessment of learning look like in an online environment today? And before I introduce the presenters, just a few housekeeping rules. Please note we're in a Zoom meeting and you have both audio and video microphone capability, but we're asking you keep your microphone muted unless you're interacting in some way, like during the Q&A. Please take your cues from the presenters and from me so we can create a productive environment. If you've got questions or comments, otherwise, please enter them into the chat box. And as time allows, your questions will be answered by the presenters. Also, you can use the chat feature to share your thoughts with the presenters or with each other. If you've got the ability to post reactions, do a thumbs up, etc. Or you can use the reaction icons as appropriate. Thank you for being with us. Enjoy the session. And it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters today. Cheryl Ochsenbach, she's the Secretary to Academic Senate and English Professor at Lawson College. Professor Amber Gillis, Professor of English at Compton, SLO Coordinator and Faculty Coordinator, and Roy Shabazian, Santa Ana College. And all your presenters today are from the Academic Senate for Community Colleges Accreditation Committee. And enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. We appreciate it. And good morning. Welcome, everybody. We're really glad to be able to join you. As was mentioned, we're all members of the Senate's Accreditation Committee, and we're excited to talk to you about assessing learning in an online environment. And we're going to first talk about context, challenges, and then effective practices. But want to also share, I come from the field of English and public speaking. Amber comes from English and humanities, and Roy comes from mathematics. So we're coming at this from different perspectives. And I think we all had some experience, at least teaching online, just not exclusively online prior to this. And so we encourage you, we see this as an opportunity for a discussion, dialogue with you and between all of us. And so we're gonna ask, certainly weigh in via chat. We'll use breakout rooms a little bit and look for your input and have you unmic when it's time. So please consider this a conversation, even though we're the ones kind of facilitating it. So next slide, please. So we kind of set this up in the framework about the COVID-19 pandemic, because we ourselves have had to make some shifts, as well as working alongside and hearing our colleagues as they've considered shifts, reaching back to last March and continually adjusting since then. Whether we taught entirely face-to-face or partially face-to-face previously, we've obviously had to give some thought to how we assess in this new, changing and demanding environment for many. And so just looking some at next slide, talking some about some of the challenges that we have. But let's first think, as we think back to March and the moment when we all had to go online, or the time when we transitioned and then have adjusted for summer or for fall, and now even coming into spring for those that have started. What's one thing that was once important in your classroom that really doesn't seem as important anymore? For me, it was some of the little small stakes interactions and having to recreate that kind of environment to create the community in my course in really different ways, and considering how to evaluate and what kind of stakes to make that ideally as low stakes as possible to encourage that engagement. Roy, Amber, what are some of your things? And then others please add your ideas in the chat. What was important, what's not now?
So I'll go next. I think something for me that was once important that maybe isn't as important, really trying to, I'm going to say this, punctuality. When I'm teaching and, even in a synchronous classroom, I think there's this idea that, yes, we still want students to be present. Yes, they need to be engaged. But sometimes, right, we're now in a situation where people are listening to lectures or trying to complete coursework at work. I've had students that were listening to lectures while they were working at Home Depot. So I was, their friend in their ear. So, I think for me, really, expecting everybody to be sitting down in the same place at the same time, losing some of the rigidity, I think, from a face-to-face classroom, and not forsaking, I think, rigor, but really trying to be more flexible and understand that we are living in an environment that is fluid.
For me, in my particular circumstance, the class that I'm teaching now is a fully online class, and obviously before had some classroom classes. And one of the things that's certainly different is learning students' names. Teaching in front of a live classroom obviously it puts the onus on me to learn the names, but also gives me an opportunity to, show that I have learned names of the students and for them to feel a connection. And now with a fully online class that doesn't have a synchronous component to it, their names are on every communication, and so there's less of an opportunity for that. Because it's a little easier for me to have their names all the time, but that is a different factor. And then I'll say a little bit more about assessment later on in the talk.
Thank you to those that added ideas in the chat. Cheryl, having the handouts on Canvas so they're available to students every time, right? That's a great practice to use, and we're adjusting to that, obviously. I actually really like not having to walk into a classroom having made copies, and just it's there for them. And once I can get it up, and ideally the sooner I can get it up, the earlier they can access it. Talking about cameras, and we're going to talk a little bit about that briefly, but asking them to turn on the camera, that we're kind of adjusting and realizing that's in some ways intrusive and anxiety driven for some students, and really giving them space to split attention and engage in ways that we probably didn't ask them to engage earlier or had different expectations for. Turning assignments in on time. Yes, Claudia, I think many of us have had to be much more patient, and realizing that it's not an awful thing to say this is the deadline, and it's actually really equity driven good student practice to work more flexibly with students about assignments, right? And Suzanne agreeing, more flexible attendance. Yeah, recognizing that students are splitting their time, and that signing in is different. Gosh, I do some synchronous. I teach public speaking as well, and so dealing with internet connections, we take for granted when we're sitting on campus how strong those connections are, and when we're working with students throughout the community. And I would say rural because that's where I work, but I'm learning even our urban communities are struggling with internet connections on our students' parts and even our instructors. And so, adjusting and having different expectations and patience around that, right? So, we've all obviously had to make adjustments. And so I think that reflection as we go is a good one, good practice. Next slide. And I think we reach into you, Amber. Oh, Roy, I think that you start to pick this one up and we'll jump in.
All right, great. Well, so looking at assessment and some of the challenges associated with that, we wanted to look at a few aspects of that. Just first, sort of looking at assessment methods, and then spending a little bit of time talking about how do we look at academic integrity in a new environment, and then briefly looking at technology and access and accessibility and accommodations. But let's start with a question here for everyone to think about. How has assessment changed in your classroom since the pandemic, and what challenges do you still have? So if you could chime in on the chat on that. Was this one that we wanted to do breakouts on, or chat good? So if you could chime in on that, looking in particular at assessment, what has changed and what challenges do you still have? Thank you for these comments here. I'm just going to take a quick look on this, and then if any of my co-presenters want to chime in on thoughts on this, that'd be great. There's a comment here about using low stakes assessments, auto-graded Canvas quizzes. Yeah, we'll talk a bit about that. How flexible to be about assessments now that there's less synchronicity, having to change the questions for integrity's sake, not using the same questions in future semesters, that sort of thing, I think. Great. Yeah, and then this issue about how to build the exams. Should they be completely through the LMS or using a paper-based exam? And we'll talk about some other options.
One thing that I'd like to share as a challenge. I know that we live in a world that's very fast paced. I teach English. And so for me, I've had to find a way to build a series of, yes, low stakes, but quick turnaround assignments. But I also need time to take, longer time on assessments for things like written essays. And one of the challenges that I've had is students submitting an assignment and then 24 hours later or less than 10 hours later, getting an email where a student is asking, why isn't my paper graded yet? Has that happened to any of you since you've been online? I don't know if it's because it's the TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, environment. Facebook is old, so sorry, I know we're on Facebook, but if you're on Facebook, that's old timey now. So all the young students are not on there anymore, apparently. But, so there's this quick, turnaround, this expectation that they want it now. And so for me as an English instructor, I've really had to think about ways to use things like Zoom to talk through their papers. So I can, bring their papers up on the screen and then have, like an audio visual type thing with them as I'm grading their papers. It helps me turn them around a little faster as well. But when you do have, 27 to 40 students in the class and you're trying to turn papers around, for me, that has been a tremendous challenge. So I just want to put that out there because that's always rough.
And I just saw Jennifer's comment, a lot of it's communication, right? Explaining to students early in our syllabus and then repeatedly as reminders, things like it takes us time. The bigger the assignment, the more time it takes us as instructors to grade. And, I always try to reinforce, like, you want to give me that time so I can give you stronger feedback, more thorough feedback, and that it's in your benefit to wait a couple more days, trying to really put that into a positive frame for students. And yeah, some of it is the grade book. They want to see those grade numbers filled in as quickly as possible, even on the low stakes stuff. They just, particularly those students who are really paying attention, they don't like seeing, empty spaces. They're worried that those will calculate as zeros when they've done stuff. As far as assessment too, again, teaching public speaking, I've struggled a little bit because I have to rely on the technology and try to figure out how can I make sure that students can deliver, up to the longest speeches, the 6 to 8 minutes, without hopefully running into technology drops. And I've had students dropped mid-speech, and my issues, their issues both. And so, whether I have them pre-recording some of their speeches while delivering other live, I find that just for assessment technically of those speeches, I have to do a lot more teaching of the technology and talking about, okay, these are our backup plans. And never had to think about all of that when it was just a matter of sitting together in a classroom. So rethinking our approaches and how can I make sure that they can deliver those speeches, hopefully just deliver them once, and that we do have some sort of contingency for them.
Okay, let's move to the next slide.
Also, as we're doing that, I just want to also quickly acknowledge Denise Mitchell's comment, because I know that this has been this has been a problem. And her comment, right, is that she's having problems or trouble with students reading the comments, right? And so when we talk about best practices, I want to acknowledge that. So if I forget to come back to you, please remind me, because I have some strategies and techniques that have been working this last year. Okay.
Great. And I noticed Lorraine, I think it was Lorraine's comment about a yoga class, and I hope we have a chance to hear more about how you're doing assessment there. Looking at assessment methods, a lot of these have already been mentioned, paper exams versus online exams. And I know that some of my colleagues have tried using paper exams and then having students scan the exam with a phone app and then upload that, and then factoring in some extra time at the end of the exam to do that. Obviously, there's technology issues associated with that, and integrity that we'll get into. Um, Next is using LMS tools, and somebody mentioned before about the using Canvas to give the quizzes, and somebody also mentioned randomization that Canvas can do. So those are some ways of delivering the assessments. Also, the use of OER or other external software, including commercial publisher tools. So, as you know, Canvas can integrate other tools into the software. And so, in my discipline, which is math and some of the sciences, randomization is important, as somebody mentioned on the chat earlier. And so you can get a lot better randomization using external tools. In my case, a tool called MyOpenMath that's designed for randomly generating questions. And of course, the commercial publishers have similar tools that do those things. But it also introduces some new challenges on integrating those tools with the LMS, and mostly that's worked out. But then when you add the factor of academic integrity, that becomes a little bit more complex. And we'll say a little bit more about that later. And then as we shift and think about different ways of doing assessment, looking at group work and projects. And so this has been my personal experiences. It's been a little bit challenging to incorporate projects, but in other situations, I had a very successful situation having students present a project using a video or a slideshow that they upload and then discussing that on a discussion group. I'd be curious if people have experiences with using projects or group work as part of the assessment methods. I think that's something that we could all collectively benefit from hearing about if you're up for sharing those. Switching to, and I'll ask my colleagues, Cheryl and Amber, if you want to jump in here at any time, please do. On the next topic, looking at integrity. So different ways of dealing with this. In the colleagues that talk to most, it seems like the most common method is using a camera to just have a synchronous exam and monitor students using Zoom and the cameras, just similar to how you would do it in a live classroom. But there's other ways of approaching that. I'm going to jump down to virtual proctoring. So tools like Proctorio, ProctorU, where there's some other service that is monitoring. Proctorio doesn't involve a person monitoring other than the instructor, but uses technology to, while the student is doing the exam, it uses the camera to watch the student. And my understanding is it primarily relies on, well, in addition to the data that's available on the computer, like what kind of internet sites are being accessed, whether other windows are being opened, it's also watching the student, and in particular their eyes, to see how they're concentrating on one spot on the screen, or does it look like the angle of their eyes is shifting dramatically at certain points. And it uses this kind of data to flag certain parts of the recording that are available to the instructor later on to review. It also assigns a sort of I forget the term that they use for it, but sort of like a risk factor, so you can see a percentage, and helps the instructor focus on particular sections and students to review after the exam. And then the issue of cameras being on or off. I don't know how it is in your communities, but students have a pretty hard time finding a quiet room to take an exam, quiet, distraction-free, and then also just the privacy associated with having a camera on. In particular, with some of these some of these virtual proctoring, one of the things that they look at is the sound from the microphone or sound from the computer, and they're listening to that to see if there are other people talking in the background, what other kinds of noises. And so, for using Proctorio, one of the requirements is that students are in a quiet setting to take the exam, and in many cases that's just not practical. So those are some of the challenges. Let me go back to the point about the virtual online proctoring. One of the issues there is integrating. So if you're using Canvas and integrating an external tool, whether it's OER or an external publisher, you have those two technologies integrated. And then if on top of that, you're integrating a virtual proctoring like Proctorio, it adds another element of complexity to it. And personally, my experience was it took quite a while to get the systems integrated in the way where I was sure that students, couldn't access the exam without going through Proctorio. That was one of the tricky spots. So initially, there were ways for students to, if they went to the right place, they were able to access the exam without starting Proctorio monitoring them. And so they might do the exam that way. There were ways of seeing that after the fact that happened, but then it's hard to work with a student to rectify a situation like that. So you want to try to avoid that. So that took a little while to figure out how to make that work. And it wasn't just a matter of figuring out, it was working with Proctorio, working with the external tool provider to fix it so that it would work. And then the complexity of it, there are so many settings. For those of you who have used Proctorio, you know that there's so many settings in Proctorio, different ways you can set it up, different things that you can ask it to, lock out students from or monitor during the exam. And different settings may prevent students from accessing the external tool that has the exam. And so, and it would work for some students, but it wouldn't work for other students, maybe based on their cookie settings or which browser they were using. And so that was a huge headache, having students not be able to access the exam, and then trying to work with the support through Proctorio to resolve that. But the support people at Proctorio don't know how the external tool works. And so, you get a lot of frustration resolving problems like that. So in my case, after spending a couple semesters getting the system to work properly the way I wanted it to work, I ended up deciding to stop using it, at least at this point. And so I've now just gone to basically an honor system using the online exam integrated in Canvas and randomized questions, as you've mentioned on the chat, but not using any kind of virtual proctoring, and talking to students about academic integrity up front. But that's where I am at the moment, and I'd be curious to hear how everyone else is dealing with situations like this. I'm going to pause here to check in with my colleagues on time, and if they want to add anything here.
I'm reading
Okay.
through some of these comments and I'm loving it. I think exams and proctoring exams, I think, is a very interesting topic. We probably could have just an entire breakout on that one topic alone. But for me, I teach also humanities. So in English, they have some timed writing and things like that. But in the humanities courses that I teach, I know somebody said, oh, if we have timed exams, they don't have time to Google. And they will, right? They'll Google things like that. But I always know when they Google, because whatever is on Dr. Google is not always the same thing that's in their textbook. Right. So if I ask them who the inventor of the Olympics is, they give me some person that was, a French gentleman who said, we're going to do the Olympics. But that's like in the 1800s. The Olympics were created by the Greeks. So we know that. And so yeah, I know where they're getting their information. So I've had to be creative over the years. But what I found is that to kind of help reduce anxiety, and actually I saw a really significant increase in just in testing scores, was really giving students a week to take an exam, but then it's also timed, right? So they'll have Monday through Monday to take an exam. They can take it in their pajamas, whatever, whatnot. But then once that clock starts, right, they've got 90 minutes. What I also do is I block off 2 90-minute windows. I'm available. I'm on Zoom. So whether they log in or not, even for my asynchronous classes, I say, I'm going to be online during this time. So if this works for you, take your exam during that time. So I'm available to you in live time. And more students over the last 2 years have taken advantage of that because I can help them clarify information, right? I can also tell them it's not letter B. So that, that really helps. Seeing what works with your schedule and making yourself available to students has really helped, even in that asynchronous fashion.
Andrea reminded me of the concept of timing the exams, and that is something that I still do, even though I ditched Proctorio, is have a time limit. And as she points out, just sort of limits the amount of time that students could maybe do some other research that if you don't want them to do that. And then I think David and Jennifer both mentioned similar concepts of using quizzes as a formative or repeatable, so that students are learning from the assessments as opposed to it just being an assessment tool exclusively. Great. I'm gonna pick up the pace here. I think we probably want to keep some time for doing breakouts. And Cheryl, I'm going to look to you to tell us where we're doing the breakouts. But looking at the technology and access, we've talked about how Wi-Fi connections have been challenging, hardware access. At my college, there was a time where we were distributing a lot of laptops. We're still doing some of that, but that was an issue. Using phones and tablets and versus laptops. I'll tell you right now, I'm using my phone to do this Zoom session, and it does have some limitations. And so those are things that students are dealing with. And then getting technology support, especially initially. I know that ITS departments across the state were challenged to try to deal with all the technology support that was needed. And did some heroic work on this regard. But some of the technology support comes from our LMS providers like Canvas. And then moving to accessibility and accommodations. Obviously, accessibility became the challenges changed drastically. Using closed captioning for recorded videos and for live videos, having student support available in different formats than everyone had been used to, both those providing the support and the students, and then having our documents that we might have distributed in different ways, making sure that those are accessible in electronic format, and then just being able to provide adequate support where everything is maybe taking more time. So those have been challenges. Cheryl, Amber, any other thoughts on these?
No, I think you covered it well.
Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Okay. So this is me, and my son is handing me a box of cookies. Does anybody want a box of cookies? Right? So this is my toddler. He only does this when I'm about to speak, right? I always call on students when they're about to put something or have just put something in their mouth to eat. So I found a couple of books when I first, started transitioning really to online teaching, or at least synchronous teaching. Synchronous teaching, for some reason, I don't know why, it terrified me. I've been in the classroom a little over a decade. I've been teaching online 9 years asynchronously, but for some reason, like feeling like I'm live was terrifying for me, and I don't know why. But when I really started thinking about, you know, what students needed and what was going to work for me in the classroom and what wasn't, I started reading. And so a quote I found by Doug Limov says that nearly everything about teaching has changed for teachers over the past few months, except the fact that students need us. And so for me, when I really started looking about how I was going to really approach this online environment, or at least this, you know, synchronous environment with 3 kids at home. I have 2 school-age children. One of them has special needs, and I have a 2-year-old who just turned 2 in January. So my house is chaos, right? And so trying to lecture live sometimes, it was a no-go. So for me, I had to make sure that I was extremely flexible. But I also had to remind myself that I am human. I can only do the best that I can, and that that I need to remember why I went into teaching, and that is to help, right? To help students figure out what it is that they want to do so they can get to do that very thing, right? So this quotation has helped me a lot. So I want to ask you just briefly, just because we're running out of time, I just want you to chew on this idea, right? How have you had to adapt, right, to your student needs, right? To their needs, to their challenges, to their situations, right? And also I would add to this, you know, how often do you think about that, right? And how often do you write about that? Do you meditate on that? So if that's not a common practice, I would encourage you, right, to keep doing that. All right. So I'm not gonna, you know, these are just a couple of effective practices that have worked in my classroom. So engagement right out of the gate. So I know that in this presentation, we've done a lot of talking. We've asked you to do, you know, to participate in the chat, and you guys have been great. But sometimes the silence, right, is deafening. And I don't know if any of you have ever, you know, if you're doing this live and it feels like you're talking to yourself, you're talking to a wall, and it's very isolating. And if students don't have their cameras on, and then you're talking to a bunch of, you know, images and, you know, weird things. And so it can be a little bit of a challenge. So if you're able to really get that engagement out of the gate, it's helpful for students. It's also helpful for you, right? And it improves, right, the energy of the class, right, immediately. So I like to start with icebreaker questions. I would do this even, you know, my face-to-face courses, but I ask them questions that are a little silly, right? So I'll ask them, you know, what's a word that gives you the creeps, right? For me, it's moist. It's gross. I don't like it. Right? So everybody laughs, everybody chuckles, but it's a way for me to be able to take attendance really quick, and then everybody is called on, so everybody has to engage. Another question, right? iOS or Android? It's not up for debate. Just give me the answer, right? And I can do that in a poll or things like that, and it gets people engaged. Also, I like to share an agenda, right? And for some reason, when I went online, I used to write an agenda all the time. I'd write it out, keep going. But for some reason, when I got online, right, I wouldn't share that at first. So what I started doing is using the whiteboard, posting the agenda there, and then asking students, right, what do you want to do in class today? What are you trying to get out of class today? And then I would encourage them to add their items also to the agenda, and then we would kind of rearrange, because sometimes what was important to me to get done that day wasn't always what was most important for students that day. So we wanted to make sure that they were advocates for their own learning, right, and agents, right, and authority, right, in their own classroom. And then finally, right, we want to check their understanding as we go along. There's a lot of conversations in the chat right now about low stakes, right, assessment. This is the perfect way. Low stakes assessment. Also, if you use participation points or things like that, use polls, breakout questions, and short answers in Canvas during lectures or videos to kind of check their understanding. Okay, so I'm going to see if this is going to work. So I want you to share an effective practice with us. So before you put it in the chat, maybe you already have, I am going to put a link in the chat. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment. I can see all your lovely faces again. Hello. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link. Let's see. Let me copy my link. Copy link. And let me send it to all of you. Okay, so this is a Jamboard. All right, so if you've never used this before, this is really fun. And let's see. And so what this does, you can use this in your classroom also. I don't know if any of you have used this, but what you do is you use this to create a sticky note. So what is still a challenge? Right, wearing pants to lecture. All right. All right, because I'm at home. I don't want to. I've been eating, right? So I've created a sticky note. So I want to give you about 2 minutes because we're out of time. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to add a sticky note and put it there on the Jamboard, if you
We
would
actually
please.
have 15 more minutes, so I
Oh, we
think we'll
do?
have time to go
Oh.
even 4 or 5 minutes if we need
Okay,
it.
you got 5 minutes.
Do it.
Yay.
Yeah.
I usually set a timer for my students, but I won't do that for you. I'll keep time for us.
Amber, there's a comment about letting everyone edit the document. Is there a
Oh.
setting for that?
There probably is, and I'm sure I didn't set it. So let me see what I can do. Let me see. Says anyone can edit, anyone can view it. Hold on a second.
Amber, all you need to do is you need to go to anyone can view and change it to anyone can edit, and then drop the link again, and then we can edit and participate.
So how do I do that?
Where it says anyone can.
Okay,
right
there I go.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
it just says restricted or anyone with link. That's strange.
And then on the right, change the editor. There you go.
Editor. There we go.
then
Anyone with a
copy and
link.
Paste.
Okay. Okay. I don't know why that was so hard for me. It's because I'm nervous. Okay, so let me put it in the chat again. Okay. All right. Let's try again. Sorry about that. Thank you. Did it work?
Yeah, it's working for me now. And so while
Okay.
folks start to do that, I just want to highlight a couple of the additional strategies that have been in the chat as you've been talking, Amber. And Maribel shared that, like having family at home, that as she has students submit recordings in Spanish to be able to, hear family in the background. And so adding content modules into the course that allow for children and family to engage with the language learning. Like, that's a really cool idea. I like that a lot.
That's really cool.
Influencing kids, right? Occasionally I think, many of us have had a child attend class in person, and I always hope that if they have a good experience that day, that it'll influence their interest in attending college someday. And, here doing it in an online environment, I think that's awesome. I really like that.
Yeah, I
Cheryl,
agree.
I found the same thing, having weekly modules where they have, a full week to know what they need to do and do it at their own pace, but still having that deadline. And then, you know that you can be flexible with the deadline if it really comes down to it, but, giving students the agency and the power over their schedule really, and managing their time. For me, they appreciate that. And, I also hear they appreciate having that deadline to work towards rather than more open-ended stuff. So. Karen, you're cracking me up. You promise the students you'll do a fun snack tasting at the end of an instructional videos or in a synchronous session. That's great. And then they can share. How fun, in the community laughing together. How wonderful is that in the learning environment? And, little ways to create some engagement together. That's awesome. Making comments on rubrics as you grade. Monica, yeah, absolutely. And then Amber, you want to highlight stuff that's popping up on the Jamboard?
Yeah, so some of the things, and this is a big challenge, and this one is kind of right there, is active engagement, right? Can't replicate a real classroom. Yeah, and I think, I'm gonna push back on that just a smidge, and I'm gonna say, what's a real classroom to you, right? So, and again, that's not an attack, because this is a struggle for me as well, right? And we are here, right, assessment, right? And our goal is to make sure that students are learning. So I don't think an online environment is going to replace a brick and mortar or face-to-face type environment, but I still think that it can be an engaging place. And it's going to take us, I think, as instructors, to be flexible, to maybe try things we didn't want to try. I'm on TikTok now. I never thought I would be on TikTok. I'm on TikTok. I create grammar minutes. And what that does, right, is that, it helps me become more succinct. I'm loquacious. I talk and talk and talk. So if I'm not, I do, if I'm not clear, and short, sweet, and to the point, students are going to fall asleep, My voice, I don't think, is very soothing, but students are constantly falling asleep. So, my kids, right, they run when they're like, oh, wow, she's going to start lecturing again, right? So I have to be mindful, right, of myself. So, also too, I think it's also important to know that everybody now is online. And there are still a variety of learning, right, strategies, or at least learning, what's the word I'm looking for, right, ways of learning, right? So you're still going to have students that are tactile learners. So what kinds of things can you do in an online class that's going to make things tactile? What about students who have anxiety? I would tell you this, all of my introverted students, they're loving this environment, right? Because they can sit at home and they can, participate, and they can, they don't have to interact with anybody else except for online. So that has helped. Things like this, using Jamboards, things like this, I think this does help also because it keeps people engaged. I think there's the learning curve for Zoom, I think I'm still round in the corner, but I think, we're around that curve, but I think some of us are doing much better with Zoom now. Students not coming to office hours, right, online. I had that problem sometimes before, right? I also require students to come to office hours just one time. It's only, I offer them an opportunity to have extra credit, right? Even though I say it's required, I give them extra credit points. So if they don't come, I don't penalize them. But if they do come, they get extra points.
Amber, I just
go
wanted
ahead.
to notice, excuse me, you've got about 9 minutes left for the session.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Somebody's asking, or is somebody pointing that with the pen? Being more flexible and willing to use alternative tools to keep students engaged. Yes, I think that was what I've just been saying, right? So thank you. Yeah, flexibility, scaffolding. I don't know about you, but I have been scaffolding more now than I ever have. And especially if you're in an asynchronous situation, that can be challenging. Right. So students are struggling, right, to build an assignment. If you give them an essay prompt, right, helping them really kind of break down and scaffold that assignment can really help. I'm looking through the comments or through the sticky notes. Has anybody mentioned anything about the use of tutoring? Are your students using tutoring services? Are they taking advantages of those?
I'd love to hear if folks are, because I've had a harder time connecting students to tutoring, even though technically we have tutoring available more now than we did previously. But still getting students to engage with tutoring has been a challenge for me.
Okay, so somebody does recommend tutoring. They don't always use it. Which, yeah, I think that can also be true in a face-to-face setting, right? Let's see, there's a few things in the chat. Oh, that's nice. Yes, Veronica, the introverts love virtual learning, don't they? Yeah, they really do. They really do. We have tutors come into our classrooms and give presentations. Hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm, and I asked them to talk about themselves a little bit, not just like, I'm here to help you with your paper, but these are the kinds of things that I'm interested. This is why I became a tutor. This is what I'd like to do and how I'd like to help you. So students are, especially if we have student tutors, right, they'll come in periodically and just poke in and say, hey, we just had a few minutes. We just wanted to come check out your classroom and say hi and just check and see if anybody might need us. And then they pop right back out again. So that does actually, because they become more familiar faces, students are more inclined to go seek their help as a result. So that has been helpful for us. Yes, right. So the tutors can join the class and they can make an appointment online. Definitely, right. A lot of our students, they'll use our tutors and our counselors. They use Cranium Cafe. I don't know if you guys are using that on your campus, but we use Cranium Cafe. And so when the tutor or the counselor or somebody is online, it shows like a little green dot that says that they're online. So students can pop in for drop-in tutoring all the time. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start closing this up so we can come back to our slides. And I just put my foot into cookies. Hold on a second. Okay, I'm good. All right, I'm back. Sorry. You're like, wow, we got to this part and it's kind of a mess. No, that's Gillis. Okay. All right. So let's go back to it. Thank you all so much for participating in that Jamboard. That was really great. Let me see if I can find my, there I am. Okay. Sorry, my child is talking to me at the moment. There we go. Okay, so I want to back up. All right. So we want to leave you with this quote. All right. And so, sorry, my child's screaming. The biggest lesson we've learned from this unprecedented spring may have been one we already knew, one we learn all over again each school year. The relationships between teachers and students, the commitment of teachers to improving their craft and to reaching their students, to ensuring their students grow. These are still what matter most.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. And we've spent a lot of time thinking or talking even about delivery practices, not just assessment, but I really think that indicates how important it is for us to think about our classes, obviously holistically, and that we can't think about assessment until we think about the delivery and the support and the engagement with our students. And so thank you so much to all of you for sharing your ideas, such fantastic strategies, as well as, being aware of your challenges and, continuing to put our students first. Amber, I think really if you could go back to that quote and we could leave that there, we'd be happy to engage in questions for the next 5 minutes. But thank you for all that you are all doing to serve your students well and to help them to grow. Amber, Roy, other thoughts? And then, absolutely others chime in.
I just want to hear from everyone else. I'm sorry, Roy. I just want to hear from everyone else.
And you, Roy, go for it.
Well, we've been focusing on assessment of students, but I think in a time where we're making drastic changes to our courses, it's also helpful to assess our classes. And so using student surveys and the kinds of tools that we use for delivering quizzes can also be used for getting feedback from students on how things are going and what they would want to see more. So one more dimension to that.
That's a great point. All you wise folks, share a word of wisdom with us, with all of us.
Patience. And if you make a mistake, oh well, just laugh. I always do that. Sometimes we want to teach perfectly and then things happen, like my son right now, he's singing. Of course, I have a presentation next and I don't know how that's going to be. So you're probably going to see, Amber, but we just go with the flow and be happy and, just be patient, and we're doing an awesome job. We're experts and we can do it. So I always think about that, stop just being so perfectionist and, go with the flow, things that the students need us and we have to be there for them. So I always think about that.
Thank you, Claudia. That's a fantastic reminder to be flexible, and it's okay to be imperfect, right? And no matter what, just have joy. If we share joy, our students will feel more joyous and more engaged with what we're doing. Co-teaching, presenting and chatting like we're doing in this presentation, like that's a great strategy, Denise, to have that, or Jennifer, to have that opportunity. No, wait, who said it? It moved too fast. Lorraine, sorry. Great stuff.
Yeah, just remember that we are kind to our students, but to be kind to yourself, right? And I know I said it earlier, there's only so much you can do. My students saw my son break the cabinet door. They were like, he's behind you. And I was like, I'm aware. And the whole cabinet pantry door was like on its hinge. Somebody who teaches physics would have to explain that to me because I just didn't understand. And, I'm having a teachable moment, right? And a lot of kids are like, we're glad that we're going to wait to that. Sometimes the life lessons are just important, right? As the grammar lesson or the sentence structure we were learning that day. So be kind to yourself. It's the best thing you can do.
Fantastic. Well, thank you to my fantastic co-presenters, Amber, Roy, you're awesome. And thank you to all of you that joined us and contributed and shared your ideas. I'm really glad to have this short opportunity for interaction, and go forth. We know you're making a difference to your students, so thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you so much, everyone.
Good job. So see you in a bit then. Yeah,
Yes, I'll be there.
I hope Daniel doesn't come across, he's my special needs child. So, oh well, if he does, it is what it is.
Yeah, I have a 2-year-old, and when I had my very first academic senate meeting virtually, I was so terrified that he was going to go to the bathroom, and sure enough, he absolutely did. And so I had to hand off the meeting to my VP. So trust me, I completely get it. I'll see you
Well,
soon.
I'll see you later. Bye.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. Bye, Roy. Thanks again.
Bye, thank you.
Okay, everybody, we need to close out the session. Thank you. Remember sessions 2 and 3 later on today. Bye-bye.